Welcome to Broadcast Astrology, Insight for Humans.
This is Lisa Pesnichek.
And I'm Sara Beckner, and we're here to deep dive into the fascinating world of astrology.
We offer blind chart readings, interviews with notable guests, and much more.
So keep listening as we bring you Insight for Humans.
Hello, everybody. Nice to see all of you. Today we have a really fun topic. We're looking at transits for middle age. And I know that may or may not be in your age range at this moment, but if you're not there yet, you're headed towards it. And if you're on the other side, then you know what we're talking about. So, or maybe you're right here with us. So today we have Sara and a special guest, Melissa LaFara. She's here from San Diego. And why don't you introduce yourself, Melissa?
Yeah, I am an astrologer, tarot consultant, and what I like to call an all-around creative from sunny San Diego, California. And yeah, I've been practicing astrology since 2008. I like to call myself a modern traditionalist because I started in modern, but I have adopted traditionalist, structure and style. And I love bringing them together and doing predictive work. I'm a big fan of predictive work. And yeah, I also host the Energetic Principles podcast since 2018 and have recently published a tarot deck called Tarot of Her, which will be kickstarting later this fall for the second edition. So I'm a busy gal and I love astrology.
And that's why we're here. Wonderful. So I know that all three of us are either on the tail end or completely done with these midlife transits. And just to kind of set the groundwork for what we're talking about with midlife transits is the transpersonal planets or modern planets, the ones that move more slowly, that are further out there. They're situated within our chart and they make their way around and aspect our natal position of those same planets. And these planets that I'm speaking about specifically are Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. We can also throw the nodal axis in there. We can throw Chiron in there. Even the Jupiter cycle could also play into this. But I think the ones that we're mostly focusing today on are Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. What happens is these planets, hard aspects to our natal planets, and that all happens around the same age for each of us, especially for Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. Their cycles are very regular, where Pluto can be a little bit off. It has variations in its cycle. And so the handful of transits that we're really most specifically honing in on is the Saturn square, which happens around 36, and then the Pluto square, which happens around 38. And that's for those of us who have Pluto, say, in like Libra. It's like I said, that's gonna fluctuate. The Neptune square, which happens around 42. And then there's the Saturn opposition that happens set around like 44. Is that correct?
44, 45, yeah.
44, 45. And then the Uranus opposition, which happens around that same time. So, and then the Chiron conjunction happens at 50, a little ways after that, kind of solidifying those transitions that those planetary transits have culminated with. So that's what we've got. That's what we're going to be covering in a nutshell as far as the baseline. So Melissa, how's middle age been going?
How's it been going? Oh my goodness. I will go ahead and say it's a weird amalgamation of events. It's actually hard to put in words because I feel like part of it is just so felt, the experience of coming to this point in life. And midlife is always hard to really determine, like, when does it start? When does it end? And it depends on your chart where there might be extra pressure around those particular beginning and end points. But I will say that it does change you. And there's a real existential component to it that is hard to put into words, but that's where the changes happen. Like your outer life can change through the pressure and the shifts in both your own directive in life and the people in your life and what's going on in the world. Because as Lisa stated earlier, a lot of these planets that we're talking about are collective energies. And so what happens outside of us and we respond. But to me, it's really about this internal process that we have to come to terms with and almost like I mean, maybe it's my Pluto talking, but almost like a reckoning, so to speak.
Absolutely. Absolutely. How about you, Sarah?
It's a ride. I do look at the whole thing as sort of this developmental arc. And we start with Saturn. We think about Saturn as the planet that really rules the material plane and karmic consequences and has a lot to do with our work in this life and how we build ourselves. And it seems like, this first half of life is really about building up the structures, the material structures, the sense of home, family, relationship, identity, career, whatever it is. And then you get on the midlife ride and you realize a lot of that stuff doesn't necessarily work in a truly Saturnian way. You can apply yourself, you can work in certain ways, and then you hit midlife and realize the things over which you have very little control. And for me, certainly that started with that Pluto square at around 37 years old. And I think Pluto often brings the initial, Melissa, you had a word for it earlier when we were talking, like a reckoning. You called it a reckoning. It does seem like it comes with an initial sense of loss that's completely outside of your control. And as that all erodes, that's when something else starts to be birthed in us, And it's so fascinating. And I don't know in my own journey, just because in the midst of all this has been 2020 and the pandemic and all of that. But I feel much more on the other side of these transits, and I'm much more connected to what we're doing on the planet as humans. It was a personal journey, and now it really does feel transpersonal in the sense that I much more have my pulse on how we're all interconnected and what we're really doing here, and more of a sense of legacy. And I don't know, the aperture has widened a lot as I've gone through all of these transits.
Yeah.
It's rich. It's really rich, but it's hard.
It's rich.
It's
yes.
really hard. I like to think of my Pluto square as like just being on the ground, feeling as though this deep part of me was both disintegrating and also demanding to come to the forefront. Like there was these two forces happening, and I found myself just in total breakdowns, needing to understand more of who I was, and a part of me that I've always kind of pushed away. And my Pluto's on my ascendant, so it was quite intense for me, and it had a lot to do with who I am personally and how I show up in the world. Having Pluto in any sort of prominent configuration to your chart really requires you to show up in a certain way. And for many of us, I think maybe even more so for women, we tend to show up more strongly for other people or allow other people to take up all of the space. And I also have a very strong Neptune configuration in my chart, so I was very much that way. So that was a really kind of this time of disintegrating the part of me that wanted to please everybody else and letting the part of myself be born that was okay with maybe making people uncomfortable or stating my mind, because Mars is also square that Pluto conjunct my midheaven. So it's like I have this part of me that I had been neglecting, and it's going to show up differently for everybody depending on the configuration in your chart, which Melissa, you were speaking to before we jumped on, which is fascinating, I think. But that's kind of my Pluto story and really set the stage for all of the rest of the transits that came after that, because I had to be brutally honest with who I was and show up in that form. Otherwise, I just couldn't go on anymore.
Well, I think that speaks to, because it really is going to coincide with what Plutonian generation you're a part of. And I'm pretty sure all of us here are Pluto and Libra.
Yep.
And so there is the Pluto tension had a real relational dynamic to it, depending on how it was hitting your chart. For me in particular, it was, I have Pluto in Libra, but, and a T square with my full moon and in the 12th house, which is fun. And so I'm a very strong personality as it is. And I have Uranus on the ascendant. So I'm like things my way. I'm very specific. But I think a big part of the Pluto square, when I talk about reckoning, is the fact that you might have to reckon with things that are out of your control, especially relationally. Because for me, my experience was I had built this wonderful thing and put energy and years of my life into my passion, and my passion involved working with other people in a creative cycle. And then through forces out of my control, one person that was integral in my dominion plans had a traumatic brain injury and almost lost his life. And it was a huge shift, and there was nothing I can do about it. And then there was a situation where another aspect fell apart because a relationship I was in that was integral to my goals in life and my obsession essentially wanted to do something different with their life. And there was nothing I can do about that. So my life shifted because of things that happened to other people. And
Mm.
with Pluto, it's like you could fight it all you want, but you're just fighting yourself. It's like grasping, thin air. And and then it has you look at yourself and your own, because, sometimes in Pluto's situation, there can be desperation, like things can
Mhm.
feel desperate. And so it's really intense to have to accept that there's a big level that's out of your control. No matter how passionate about something you are, you can't, but you can always reallocate your power. And I think that's the beauty of this transit is it's not like you're powerless.
Mm-mm.
You might be powerless in one particular situation, but it's about, I think about the square is always about this crossroads. You can't walk two paths. You have to walk a different path, and one path closes off a lot of the times. And then you can choose to find empowerment elsewhere and then walk a different path with more authenticity, especially if you look at your stuff and you look at your shadows and you're willing to change and move on.
Yeah, I feel like of all of the hard transits, I mean, not even just the Pluto square, which is the strongest Pluto transit to itself, but also whenever Pluto has any strong contact with any of our personal planets or points, that those tend to be those quintessential times that change everything. And when you're in it, it feels hard. It feels desperate. It feels like the last place you'd ever want to be. But it's one of those situations or circumstances that you later down the road look back and say, man, I wouldn't have changed that for anything. That was the most valuable thing. And it in the end, once you go through the ick and the muck, you're left with such riches in your life that it's really, I think, one of the most potent and difficult, but also powerful transits that we can receive.
Yeah.
There is some kind of relationship there between, when you're talking about tapping into that power, where does it come from? And there is something that I think the intensity of our feeling and passion arises out of that, whatever that challenge and sense of desperation is. And I think oftentimes it does, with Pluto anyway, come literally with as a brush with death.
Mhm.
Melissa, you had a friend who had a brush with death, a colleague or friend. And my mom passed away at that age when I was 37, getting my Pluto square. And sometimes it can literally be like literal loss or being close enough to it that everything else in life starts to carry a different gravity. Like your
Yeah.
relationship to things change because you understand, I don't know, how precious it all is in a way.
Yeah. There's also, I think, themes of survival and themes of fear. Like my husband is currently in the midst of his square, and it's tied up with all kinds of personal planets for him. And it's been brutal, just like his self-worth, his feelings of just survival, like being able to support the family and do all the things and be successful in just his entire place in the world has been really shaken to its core. So it's been exciting to see how he's reorienting himself. And I'm excited to see, 5 years down the line, how this all will have played out. but nice to know the astrology of it too.
I feel like one term with the Pluto square is at some level there's a humbling that happens. And when we're humbled, depending on how proud we are or how stubborn we are, it can be very difficult. But sometimes if we're already maybe a little on the humble side and then we're extra humbled, that can have issues of self-worth that come up with that too, because it's so into this, how much agency do I have? Why is this so strong hard? What do I have to change? How do I own my power? Yeah, it can be very humbling, but had I not had that experience, honestly, I would not be talking to the both of you today because my whole life did a not a 360, I'd be in the same place. But a 180.
Yeah.
And that was my kickoff to really dive into my astrology career and start my podcast and do all those things. So, like Lisa was saying earlier, there really is purpose and riches behind whatever it is that you lose, because even if it's humbling or feels desperate and asks a lot of you, the change is there for a purpose.
Yes, absolutely. All right. So thank you, Pluto, for all your gifts. Do you guys want to shift into the Neptune square, which happens around 42, and kind of speak to that? I feel like maybe pulling these apart, we might be able to sink into the specifics a bit more.
Yeah, that Neptune square. So it can really happen anywhere between 38 and 43. So it's it's not as erratic as Pluto, but I feel like for me it happened when I was 40 and 41
Yeah.
was my Neptune. I think of it as the popping bubbles. Dreams. Oh, dreams. You have them. They might not be realistic at this point. You might get new dreams, but are those really viable? It's a weird trade-off of like old dreams, new dreams, what's viable, what's not, feeling a little lost, but also idealistic. It's as Neptune is, it's sometimes hard to put a finger on.
Yeah. Sarah, did you have anything around your Neptune square that...
I mean, yeah, the whole thing is a journey. But I'm thinking about, it's hard for me to take things in isolation because, the Uranus opposition often hits people right at the same
Yeah,
time.
that's true.
And, as an acupuncturist, I've been practicing for over 22 years. A large percentage of my client base has been people in midlife. I think that's when women start to seek care because they're like, what's going on? It starts with the Uranus bringing in, like, somebody's ripping out the rug underneath you, the anxiety, the sleep disturbance, the impulse to unshackle yourself from wherever you've been stuck in life, And then that Neptune on the heels of that, either preceding or following that Uranus opposition. And some of the sense of I think there can be periods in this whole series of transits where there's a sense of depletion and confusion, and like we don't have the fuerte, like the physical fire and energy to necessarily tackle things in the same way. I wanted to look at Barbara Handclau's work again because she talks about Kundalini rising as sort of a parallel to this whole developmental journey that we go on and how that connects with the transits. And as that Kundalini rises, we get, it really does coincide with these transits in terms of pushing us into new places developmentally.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a complete readjustment and reorientation. Yeah.
And like we were speaking about with the Pluto square, it really depends on how Neptune's configured in your chart. Neptune is configured in a square to my Sun, my Mercury, and my Venus. And Venus rules my chart and is in my 6th house. No matter which house system you use, that Venus is definitely in the 6th house. So I got really sick. Looking back, I think I was in the early stages of perimenopause, but also postpartum because I had just had my youngest. I was just a year or two out from that. So I was exhausted with 3 children, postpartum, early perimenopause. And I had like 2 years of the worst headaches, several sinus surgeries. My immune system was totally crashed, my nervous system, like the whole thing, my whole system just spiraled out. And I remember because the Jupiter Neptune conjunction took place right on top of my Venus. And I was like, yay, this is going to be amazing. I remember laying on the couch being like, no, I think I'm just going to die. Like, I was just in so much pain and I had no energy at all while I'm trying to raise these 3 little kids. But at that time, I just was like, you just need to lie down and let yourself connect to the more subtle energies, even though it was a painful process. So there was no other way for me to do that. And in retrospect, it was a really beautiful, it sucked. It was really hard, but it did teach me how to take care of myself on a deeper level. It showed me how to prioritize my own self and my health and all of that. And also, it opened up my spiritual world so much deeper than had I not gone through that. I don't even know how to explain it. But if anybody has been really sick before, then that process of feeling so vulnerable and so weak just gives you this whole different context of being in the world.
I'm sort of curious where in the timeline where the Saturn opposition came at that, because I would
That
think
wasn't until later.
We get the shakeup, right? We experience
Mhm.
all of the losses and confusion and everything that comes with those transits. And then after it, we get the Uranus or the Saturn opposition that sort of says, okay, now is the time to either level up, implement the strategies to take care of this physical body, to tend to those things, to implement those lessons that you've learned, and integrate it, feet on the ground. And if you don't, I think the consequences get a lot steeper when we hit that Saturn opposition.
Yeah.
Well, I think the Neptune square, at least it was kind of alluding to, is like a time of a crisis of faith to some extent, no matter what it is that you're encountering. And to be to Sarah's point too, and even though, I personally felt like those transits were so far apart from one another, like in my development, but there is something to be said about encountering a crisis of faith, but then having this opposition with material reality that comes later because they are so juxtaposed in many ways. But having the crisis of faith, it can look different for everybody. If Lisa's like laid out on the couch, kids are crying, and you're like, I got nothing. What am I going to do? Is this ever over? You have to dig deep. You have to get to the spiritual component. I know for me, the Neptune square definitely my biological clock started ticking, and I don't have any children, but I had wondered, had I missed out on this? Do I have time? Is this something that I want? For me, it was happening. I have Neptune in the second. Is this what I want? It was squaring from the fifth, and I'm looking at, like babies and family. But also what was happening around that time too, which I think is very Neptunian, is this disillusionment with image and the idea of glamour. Because when Neptune squares, you wrinkle more, your skin starts to sag. You don't have the elasticity or the collagen that you used to, especially depending on how vain you might be or how much, especially from a societal standpoint, especially here in America, it's like those things are valued in a woman too. Oh, you have, your skin has to look beautiful and you have to fit into this and look pretty. You don't have to. But if there's any level of value that's tied into that framework, then there's going to be that moment. I can't even tell you. I probably funded this skincare, all the skincare stocks went up because I bought everything you could possibly imagine to prevent the inevitable. And you know what? That transit passed and I didn't look at myself in the same way. I'm like, wait, my skin actually looks really good for 42, or, like it was just something in that moment where the disillusionment with what was happening and really, and that's where maybe part of my crisis of faith was happening. because there's a part of me that might have been like, this is what I leaned on. This is a bargaining chip of mine. This is what's after this. Will I be desirable anymore? Which is silly now that I'm like how many years out to even think about. But at the time, those were real questions that were coming up for me.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's worth emphasizing that I think by the time we get to this midlife place in life, it feels like it will last forever. I don't know why at midlife, it's like, okay, yeah, I'm never going to go back to having those days where I feel like I look like $1,000,000 and I'm ready to take on the world. But you do, actually. You come back out in another way. I think some of these things that we're asked to live through, they are transient. And to the topic of fertility, yes, it does. You're a woman. At some point, there is something about closing that door. And it doesn't matter whether you've never had children or you've had one, or I know people who are like, do I have that third baby? At the Uranus opposition hits, I'm like, one more. It doesn't matter if you've had any or how many. At some point, we all have to do that work of like, okay, this is a major chapter turning. This piece of my life where that was a potential and an option, it is no more. And I think there's some grief around some of that, which can be part of can be part of any of these transits, really.
Yeah, Neptune does tie into a lot with grief. Like, honestly, I had those questions. And, at the time, my partner who's younger, I was bringing it up and he was like, no, I don't want this, or I'm not ready yet. And I was like, hello, the clock is ticking. Even if there is any sort of chance here, it's like you can't be like, well, let's just wait. And there had a lot of grief around that. And then as time went by, I was questioning, is that even what I want? Like maybe there was a savior there because I didn't know if I was maybe under the elusive bubble of this idealism of being a mother. I am a Cancer after all. Like, are we supposed to be mothers? And I experienced a lot of grief and a lot of tears because of that inevitability that Sarah's talking about, because that's the unique thing about women is that door does close. It is not open for life. You can't be like 80 and, like men can. So there's a gravity that happens with it, and it can if you're not getting what you want or you think you want, at least from my opinion, you can feel really lost and maybe even hopeless. And hope is such a weird thing too, because I feel like there's levels of hope that come up now, which is like, do I still hope for that? Or is hope futile? Because sometimes hope can be great if you need to hang on to get there. But sometimes hope can be futile in the sense that it prolongs the suffering because it's not going to happen or not in the cards in some way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I feel like something that, I guess it did happen for me. And I saw happen with my parents around this age. And I think it's really this Neptune square is this pull towards a spiritual explanation for something like this connection with this greater universe, this greater life experience that we're part of, and giving some sort of a meaning to that. And maybe it's because it's tied in, with the Pluto square falls around that same time, really throwing us into some turmoil, which we spoke to earlier. But I think I ended up really leaning into astrology. And that's the time when I really kind of fell the deepest into it was during my Neptune square. And I think that's part of that, in finding this faith in something and belief in something greater than ourselves, because also we're at this midlife point. So we need some sort of explanation of where are we going? and it can freak people out sometimes, rightfully so. To some degree. Also, I think for women and also men, it's changing our biological system. It's slowing down the reproductive system that was all revved up before. Now our body's changing. And as my story illustrates, it can really impact your health. But I don't think it does that for most people. I think I was a unique example.
There's
Yeah, that's what I
oh yeah, sorry.
But go ahead, Melissa. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say in relation to what you're saying, like I think about the endocrine system switch that
Mhm.
happens, where, we start to make more testosterone and don't men start to make more estrogen during the time in
Can,
the
yeah.
40s? Sarah, is that right? I know you're more in the medical field. Do you know?
You know what's crazy? I just learned this in the last year is that men have more estrogen than women. Period.
Hmm.
And that typically it's just they have relative, right? So much more testosterone that you don't see it. And so as their testosterone declines in midlife, it seems like they have more estrogen, but it's a relative balance.
Huh.
But
That's
we
so
do start to
interesting.
merge into each other a little bit because then, yeah, our estrogen's dropping. I think about Chiron being such a bridge and the Chiron return at 50. I do think some of those more polarized gender differences start to level out with all of these transits in midlife too, as the hormones decline.
I saw a reel the other day, which is interesting in relation to what you're talking about, where this doctor was advocating for women of middle age and beyond to be able to be prescribed female dosed testosterone because it's all out there for men, but it's not there for women because there are certain levels of depletion there. It's not like we start making it extra, but there are levels of depletion that if we were able to supplement this hormone in small dose that it needs to be, then we could actually probably be stronger and more effective in our later years. Like it would really be a boon to females in that latter stage of life. But of course, the FDA has not approved anything for women along those lines
I take it though. I
you
take
do.
testosterone. Yeah. I take hormone replacements. I take progesterone, estradiol, and testosterone.
And have you felt a significant change or?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, definitely. Yeah, and my energy levels are great. I sleep really well. I'm not waking up in the middle of the night with hot flashes. It's really, really helped me. And because of the health stuff I went through before, I was like, I'm going to do whatever I need to do in order to
Mm.
supplement my way through this because my body was really just flattened as the changes started to occur.
I mean, the depletion is a part of this stage of life. And I do think these pressures that we get to grow in these other ways help us prepare, I guess, for the inevitable vulnerability of aging.
Yeah.
If you try to go through it like you always have, while your body starts to fatigue and break down, it's not going to work. And I think that's the part of us that starts to long for or hunger for other resources. And they are transpersonal, they are outside of our body. It is widening the aperture, it is connecting to something collective, or in our case, cosmic, because we take it that far out as astrologers, but it's finding other tools and resources.
Yeah. Um, my mind just went like 10 different places with that.
I started thinking actually in relation to because Lisa, you said you have the sun conjunct Pluto, right? Am I getting that right?
That's
That's
Sarah.
your sun conjunct Pluto, but you're a Libra, right? Okay. Well, one of the things I started thinking about actually before I got on this call with you both was these wider arching I don't know if you work with Fedaria at all, but when basically no matter if you're a day chart, if you were born when the sun was above the horizon versus a night chart if you're born with the sun below the horizon, we basically for day charts we get Saturn that is the primary time lord from 40 to 51, and for night charts it's the sun from 39 to 49. And I was thinking about how that could represent like extra weight during these periods. For like day charts, it's like Saturn weight, responsibility, the just being so aware of time and chronology. Like I'm a day chart and I will wake up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom and my mind will be like, oh my God, I'll never be 20 again. I only have this much time left. Like the urgency of time just like creeps in. And that can be a very depressing feeling, but it can also be something that pushes towards reward and achievement. But for night charts, there's this sun, it's the other luminary that takes its stance as the one that's sort of calling the shots here. And I know, Sara, you said earlier about there being like an egoic crisis or, kind of this identity or like the ego and like what's happening here. And it also makes me think about the sun being vitality. And depending how the sun is interacted, there can be a moment of vitality that becomes a big issue. And so, yeah, that was just something I was thinking about. And then it's like the beauty of it is on the other side, when night charts become 49 and day charts become 51, both sects go into their insect benefic, basically. So, day charts go to Jupiter, night charts go to Venus. And it feels like once we get to the 50s, I don't know how many women I've heard they'll be like, oh, yeah, I'm feeling good now.
I can't wait to be 50.
Yes, that's so interesting. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
I remember my mom telling me that the decade of her 50s was the most wonderful in her whole life. And that was after, like in the 40s, me seeing her and her be on the couch at like 42 saying, the most horrible thing about aging, Sara, she's like, nothing is new anymore. There's just nothing to get excited about. And I'm like, what? But then she ended up like loving her 50s. So yeah, there's another side.
I know, Sara, one of the things when I like spaced off after you spoke before is I was thinking about how I do yoga or workout like every day. It's how I navigate my life in order to work through all the emotions. But yoga is one of my primary practices, and it has changed dramatically over this past decade. Before I started all of these midlife transits, I was doing CrossFit. I was, going to yoga class and work every posture to its edge. And that felt really good and nourishing to me. But I don't even want to do that anymore. If I'm doing weights or however I'm moving my body, I'm very cognizant of my form. I'm moving slower. I'm probably not going as deeper. It doesn't have the same effect on my body. I feel more depleted and less nourished the harder I push those sorts of things. I wanted to bring that up just because it feels like kind of a metaphor in general, that there's a different way that we're just moving through life as a result of these transits, specifically like Pluto and Neptune, slowing us down, breaking us apart in order to put ourselves back together and have this completely new relationship physically, spiritually, emotionally within ourselves and everything around us. But I just wanted to put that in. And does anybody want to jump in and speak to, I know we've kind of spoken to the Saturn opposition. We receive a hard Saturn transit about every 7 years. So this is a pretty common cyclical occurrence that we're used to. But the Saturn opposition, kind of like what Sara said, occurs towards the end of Pluto, Neptune squares, making us reconcile with what's happened and maybe creating new patterns, creating new ways to establish longevity within our life. But I don't know if either of you wanted to speak to that.
Well, I feel we almost have to address Uranus first because
Right?
it's the part that
I'm
comes
just totally
before
open to that.
Saturn.
And as I looked at you, I was imagining your Uranus opposition. I was like, what did that look like for her? It must have been, because yours is angular, it probably had a really big effect on you.
It did. And I feel like, it did and it, I'm like, it did and it didn't. No, it did. But I feel like there is a succession of the two together because it's interesting to go from Neptune challenges to this heightened Uranian, change things up. You're feeling anxiety. The Furies are within you. Things are different. And then there's this like block of Saturn. And what's
Don't
interesting
forget
about
to pay your bills.
the reality, do you have a retirement fund? Wait, that's what's going on there. So with the Uranus opposition, because I have Uranus on the ascendant, so I'm very familiar with Uranus, right? I'm living Uranus all day, every day. I consider myself a quirky individual. I like to do things my way. And so where did I get a Uranus opposition? On the other side with other people. And so let me tell you, I attracted in a Uranian into my life, and we got to go head to head with one another. A lot of it for me was relational and the inconsistency of dealing with, someone else who has their own individuality, their own ways of doing things. And, because Uranus is can be very much about, like, you don't know where things are coming from. There's changes. You got to be flexible. But Uranus can actually be really rigid too, especially when you think about fixed signs. I have it in a fixed sign. Um, Lisa, I assume you have it in, do you have it too in Scorpio, Sarah? Yeah. So there can be a rigidity to Uranian energy. So it's asking you to do things differently, to keep an open mind, to be able to bend, not break, to look at patterns that really are not serving you in any way, shape, or form and be willing to change them. And a lot of times it's an opposition. So it's going to come from outside of you. Like, what's the world handing you? What's that person or that partner handing you? Because they will be Uranus, no matter if it's on your descendant or not, it's going to have that quality. So it can be very unsettling, and there can be a lot of anxiety with this transit. It can be very activating and awakening, which Uranus can be too. But I think one of the things that really helped me hit home about this transit and how important it is, it's not just Uranus opposition, but at that time too, we actually come to, if you follow progressions and in your progress chart, you actually reach your opposite lunar phase by progression during that same time. So say like I was born with a full moon. I'm used to being a full moon personality. And now I'm all of a sudden at the tail end of a balsamic. Like, that is not comfortable. And so it's like you get both at the same time. So I guess what I'm getting at is you're not going to be comfortable. And there is a reason for that.
I'm so glad you brought that up, Melissa, because I was trying to tease that out in my own mind because I'm also a full moon baby. And so, yes, I was in that balsamic and new moon phase, like during these really significant transits. And so, yes, there was, it's just like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? Like I couldn't even see where this was all going.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think too, something you said made me realize it's just important to keep this in mind too, in terms of all of our relationships. I mean, because you have to consider a lot of your colleagues, peers, and friends are around your same age, many of them, and like how generous of spirit we need to be with people just because we're all going through this stuff and it is demanding reprioritization of, shuffling your priorities, making significant changes. And so you've mentioned some things with people, some things you've gotten into. And I feel like I've somebody as a Libra sun, I have friends that go back to, 12 years old. I've clung to them, drug them through my life. And a lot has shifted in this decade in terms of relationship and friendship. And it's been amazing. Wonderful astrologers. There's been a lot of really beautiful and unexpected connections. And there's also been some things I've needed to let go, which is not characteristic of me. But again, I feel like all of these transits are asking us to just come into greater levels of authenticity to prepare us for ultimately being more vulnerable. And also, like, yes, time does become a factor in a way. We only have so many years left on this planet to really live into our purpose and reason for being. So it does carry much more weight, and it makes me want to distill everything to its essence. I want to be in right relationship. I want to be in places that feed and inspire me. And I was just thinking about what you were saying, Lisa, with just changing your workout and all of that. And part of the gift of Saturn kind of coming in the middle of this decade of the 40s is that it's kind of a leveling up of understanding Saturn in the sense that I have a new level of understanding as far as the gifts of Saturn. Like that it doesn't have to be crazy and big. It can just be like the small, consistent effort. And I have a level of discipline now because I really recognize that things born under Saturn are just beautiful and long lasting and rich. And I don't mind just putting in the slow, steady work and waiting for it to, even if I know it's not going to bear fruit for 5 years, I'm capable of that now in a way that I wasn't really in my 20s. I didn't have the patience for it or even the understanding of how to work with time on that level.
It's beautiful.
Sorry, that was a lot. You
No.
two are provoking all sorts of thoughts. My mind is going everywhere.
Well, I feel like what, in essence, what we're saying there is that time is precious. And Saturn, and maybe this is I don't know, you want to talk about Uranus opposition, but this makes me think of Saturn opposition, is this idea of time being precious. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that my Saturn and Uranus oppositions took place pretty close to one another. So it felt like they were very kind of tied in. And it was definitely a lot of it for me was finding new ways to take care of myself and finding new boundaries, but also feeling the pressures of more adulting, kids getting older. My oldest going through his first Saturn opposition near the time that I had some really big Saturn alignments in my chart too. And Saturn, I love what you said about Saturn, Sara. And also there's this heaviness to it. Like there's this feeling that, I mean, I'm glad that it gives you a to-do list, but the to-do list often feels slogging. In order to solve the problems, time is needed, right? It's kind of this double symbolism with Saturn, that there's things that need to be done, but only time can really take care of it. The Uranus opposition for me was so tied in with that. I think that it was encouraging me to take more risks as far as my work goes and really pushing me out there. I think around that time, I started to just do more things with my practice, with my website, my newsletters, all that stuff, reorienting and just going out on my own and not being afraid of what that means and being authentic in my own skin, which is something that I had been practicing since my Pluto square, and kind of taking that to a whole new place of this is who I am, take it or leave it.
I don't want to make us conclude prematurely, but I think in some ways that's a beautiful way to sum it all up, is to just speak for a moment about what this all means in reality. So there's a piece, yes, time is precious. And what does that do? It makes me, in many ways, I feel like I'm feeling more. I'm more receptive and open to feeling. That understanding of the preciousness of life makes everything in many ways feel more exquisite and beautiful and painful and raw and all the things. And I think that non-duality that opens up, or carrying that both and, or expanding your viewpoint to really live into the full experience of being a human, is something that is definitely part of these midlife transits in this period of life.
Yeah. It makes me think of one of the things that always stuck with me that Sam Reynolds had shared was that in your 20s, it's your should years. It's like, what should I do? A lot of shoulds. And then by the time you're in your 30s, it's like, oh, I'm doing what I want to do. This is what I want to do. And then when you're in your 40s, you're like, oh my God, I must do this. Like it's a must, because you realize that time is finite. Especially, I swear, for me, that happened to me, like, I feel like from my Pluto square to my Saturn opposition, I had a lot of friends die. And, mortality starts to creep in. And it wasn't so long ago, 100 years plus, that the age that we're talking at right now was getting close to the definitive end of things. That was the life cycle. So there really is, I mean, Saturn can put on that pressure, because one of the big things about the Saturn opposition is it's the turning point since the Saturn return. So there's a lot of questions. What have I done with my life? What do I still want to do? What's working? What's not? And having the time and the patience and the devotion to then allocate your energy and effort to what really matters. Um, and because you don't know how many days you have left.
I-
And that's the great mystery of life. But, you know, you got to show up. You got to live it. You got to get to the 50s because that's where the fun is.
That's right.
And I think one thing that we didn't speak to, which I think is so central to like the broad majority of common culture's mind when it comes to midlife and like the midlife crisis of, I know you kind of spoke to it at the end of what you were saying there, Melissa, which is like the responsibilities, but then Uranus sometimes can give you more freedom. But I think sometimes people feel overwhelmed and bombarded by all of their responsibilities and feeling like they don't have access in that moment to find the tools to make it through their life in a way that makes them happy. And so they destroy everything. They divorce the wife, go and get the red sports car and whatever. You know, like that's a very like kind of stereotypical thing. But I just wanted to name it because that is that same energy, but maybe less full of wisdom. And there's a very unhealthy way to deal with this too, which I think is more of what people tend to think of as far as midlife goes in midlife crisis specifically.
Well, and that's why it pays to know this information, because if you
Exactly.
don't know that after your Uranus opposition, you get a Saturn opposition, you could go buy that car, you could divorce that person, you can do wild things with your life, and then Saturn will come and check you. So
Yeah.
it's like, why did I do that? I had built this all up. I miss my kids, you know, why? So it is important to know that that I don't want to say we can't get too wild, because sometimes it's important to get wild. If your life needs to change and you've wanted to do something for so long and it's just that dislodging piece that allows you to do that and then make that effort, that's great. But it's good to know what's on the other side of the
Yeah.
excitement, I guess.
I think that Saturn Uranus can be like a breaking point for people. And especially after the Pluto Neptune activity, there's this breaking point, like that you have to make a decision. There's
Yeah.
a decision to make at that moment after these years of so much vulnerability. But
I've seen so much of it through the years, so much of it with my clients. And I think it's just worth mentioning again. Obviously, there's going to be a little change in flavor based on our natal charts, how this shows up and how it expresses ourselves. And there's so many interesting other facets to look at. Like you said, Melissa, with Fidaria or layering on the progressed lunation lunar cycle. So knowledge is power. And I think the more we have some sense of self-understanding and have some tools that map, have guides, have trusted people, have people with some wisdom, you know, helping us navigate this journey. I think it's a good thing. Yeah,
And we
absolutely.
are all here to help you. So if you need
that's
that
right.
help, we're here for you.
Wonderful. Well, I think we'll close up. Melissa, is there anything else you want to say in closing about midlife transits and kind of summing up, sending off, all of that?
Yeah, I feel like if you're not there yet, get ready for the ride, but it will make you, and it's purposeful, and it's sometimes it can be hard, but I think on the other side of it, it's just another part of life, and there's so much value in it. So stick with it. You're not alone. I think it was Sara saying earlier, it's like, you know, have grace with other people, but also have grace with other people, but talk about it with other people. I think as women, a lot of us are not talking about things like perimenopause. I know it's coming into the surface more than it was in the past, but I think the more that we destigmatize the real change that happens, especially for women, that we'll feel more supported in this process, and it won't feel more like, what are the gods doing to me? You know, we can, I was going to say commiserate with others, but not what we want to do, maybe. But we can have camaraderie with one another because we're all going through it.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
I feel such a sense of kindredness just in being and talking to both of you today, and that we've all experienced some of these things. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it's Gabor Mate who says there's no such thing really as trauma. The event is never the trauma. The trauma is going through it alone. You know, the trauma is the loneliness in it. And we don't need to be alone in it. And at some point, I think it'd be interesting, Lisa, to even look at the other facets of the life cycle, look at adolescence and what young people deal with, because I do think it normalizes a lot of our experience and also keeps us pointed in the right direction, that we understand that there's purpose to these periods of life and there is an imperative of growth that we can lean into that ultimately is going to facilitate a more purposeful and meaningful life. So it's been so much fun to chat with you, Melissa. Thank you so much for joining
thank
us
you
today.
so much for being here. It was
Thank you
really
for inviting
fun.
me.
Yeah. And check out Melissa's podcast. What's it called again?
Energetic Principles podcast. You can find it it's on YouTube, it's on Apple, it's on Spotify, it's on SoundCloud, it's in all those places. Or you can just go to energeticprinciples.com and you can find it there. But also check out my cat, because here she comes. My tarot deck, Tarot of Her, especially if you come on, cat, move it along. Yeah, I'm really proud of this achievement. It's actually something that I partnered with my dear friend, Sarah Jane Lambert. It started we talked about it for 10 years plus, probably around the Saturn return. It wasn't until the pandemic and the Neptune square that we're like, okay, let's bring this dream to life. It took a lot of time, so there was the anxiousness of the whole Uranus opposition within it, but by the time Saturn opposed itself, we had successfully kickstarted, published it ourselves, sold out a month after we fulfilled, and now we're going to do it all again. So if you're into tarot, you're into plants, you're into, kind of divine feminine, check it out, tarotofher.com.
I will definitely check it out. And I've been meaning to check out your podcast too. So we'll be putting all of Melissa's information in the show notes, so check that out. And as always, thanks for listening, and we'll be back next time to talk about the Libra ingress chart, which we're excited about. So talk to you later. Take care. Bye.
Yeah.
As always, thanks for listening to Broadcast Astrology Insight for Humans. And if you're so inclined, follow, and subscribe, and please don't be a stranger.
Signing off for now. Until next time, humans, keep your gaze upwards on the stars and be well. We look forward to sharing more soon.